pregnancy, etc.
I think a social contract is a great metaphor for the relationship between adults and children in a society. Where I think things are less happy is in the general sense that adults have an obligation to children generally.
Definitely not fair for the children, and I think that the children are not necessarily going to come through with their part of the social contract either.
When we have a divorce culture, and even a single, overall, a more general single-parent culture, what we are really saying is that the happiness of adults is so much more important than the well-being of children.
I think that in this generation of current young adults, there's a great deal of awareness that the older generations haven't done very well by them.
The sexual revolution also has meant that it's not as socially stigmatized for women to have children while unmarried. It used to signal that they were having sex while they weren't married. Well, duh.
The result of all this is that the percentage of out-of-wedlock births grows, and now is up to nearly 40%.
Young women who find themselves pregnant, don't have a suitable spouse, have the baby anyway.
Well, when so many children are born out of wedlock, they tend, not always, but they tend to not get as much parental investment and involvement in the very early stages.
The family is a key for the generation of human capital, moral capital, and social capital.
Now, since learning begets learning, you start out with less learning there, and then you can't learn as much when you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when you don't have as much when you're 7, you can't learn as much when you're 8.
Economies to register growth, to show growth, need these three elements. Otherwise, productivity, the environment where the market operates and economic activities take place is jeopardized.
And in those formative periods, the family structure, all the studies suggest, is not the only factor involved, but it's certainly important. So yes, those children born in those environments are at a significant disadvantage compared to children born in traditional two-parent caring families who spend a lot of time with them when they're young, and by age 6 or 7, they're way ahead of the other children.
I have for some time been researching the idea of sustainable development and the family. And my basic idea that you cannot have sustainable development if you don't have a sustained family.
This is where it gets weird, though, is who's reproducing, right? The problem is this is the demographic economic paradox. Those who can best sustain a large family are not having those large families. And those who can least sustain a large families tend to have more children.
Income inequality is growing, and those with lower levels of income are those typically with less stable and less two-parent families, which exacerbates the disadvantage of those children. Over time, the range of disadvantage is growing, and the degree of dispersion in our society for the children at the one end of the spectrum and the other is greater.
You have a significant fraction of children, maybe 20, 25% of the children, who are not prepared to engage in the modern economy. They don't have the skills to do so, cognitive and non-cognitive. And the average child, even the average capable child, it's very difficult to overcome that disadvantage. And that's, I think, one of the major consequences of the family structure, and this whole problem of learning begets learning, and neglect at early ages is compounded at later ages.
One of the questions, of course, is whether or not these same kinds of trends are applicable to Europe, because particularly in Northern Europe, one of the big differences between Northern Europe and the United States is the generosity of the welfare state.
The state makes much more investment in children in daycare, in subsidies for mothers, and in